Well, hi everybody, welcome back. And today's lecture is going to be on classifications of law. So let's get started. So the first question is, why classify laws? Well, if we don't classify laws, there's so many of them, it's just going to become cumbersome and burdensome for you to figure out, okay, I need to figure out the law on such and such. You need to know where to look, right? Our human brains want to put things into little compartments and categories. So we want to classify laws. We want to put them into groups and categories because then they're easier for us to understand. And it's actually easier for us to explain to other people. When you're going into the legal profession and you're going to have to explain to clients, okay, this is where this law is and why this law is in this certain group, because it fits in with this particular area of law. So that's why we do it. It tells us the situations to which it applies and how it applies in relation to other rules. That's why we classify them. So what are the major classifications of law? Well, in the United States, we have civil law and we have criminal law. Okay, just very important basic classification. Civil law is going to deal with all of those things like I ran over grandma with a car. Okay, she's going to sue me. Okay, so we're going to end up in civil court over a personal injury lawsuit. And when I lose because I did run over grandma, I'm going to owe grandma some money. Okay, I'm not going to go to jail, but I'm going to owe her some money. I ran over her. It was an accident. Now, criminal law, this is where I'm mad at grandma and I intentionally ran her over. Okay, now that's an entirely different situation. I should go to jail for that. I'm a bad person. That's criminal law. That's where potentially I'm going to lose my liberty, which is my freedom. I could go to jail. I could be fined, and I could even get the death penalty if I've killed grandma and I'm in a state that has the death penalty. So that's the difference between civil and criminal law. That's a big major difference, but it's not the only one. We're going to go into some more differences. So all law is either classified as criminal or civil, and both criminal and civil law are then made up of things called substantive laws and procedural laws. Substantive law is, I like to call it the meat of the law. Okay, it is the law itself. So, like for example, in the civil situation where I've accidentally run over grandma, the law pretty much says that I have a duty to drive in a safe manner and not run over people. Okay, it doesn't say exactly that, but you know what I'm talking about. That's the law. So when I don't do that, okay, things happen. Things move forward. In the criminal context, I am not allowed to run over grandma. I'm not allowed to kill grandma with my car. Okay, there's a law that says I cannot kill grandma. That's the substantive law. Now, procedural law is what happens to me after I've run over grandma. If it was an accident, I'm going to be in the civil court system, and there's procedures that go along with that. Grandma's going to file a lawsuit against me. Procedural law tells grandma how to assert her rights through filing a lawsuit. How does she file the lawsuit? What happens after she files the lawsuit? What happens during the trial? That type of thing. In criminal law, it starts out with the arrest procedure. Okay, I've run over grandma. I killed her. So procedurally, what is going to happen next? Well, I'm probably going to be arrested. And how I get arrested and when I get arrested and what happens to me after I've been arrested, that's all procedural law. The substance is just the law that I am accused of violated or that I'm being held accountable for. Am I going to be liable for running over grandma? Okay, does that make sense? All right, so civil versus criminal, some very important differences that if you are going to sound like an intelligent person when you are working in the legal profession, you need to make sure that you get some terminology right between the difference between civil and criminal law. Okay, civil law. What is the purpose of it? Well, the purpose of civil law, I've run over grandma. Okay, it was an accident, but grandma's hurt. I didn't mean to do it, but grandma has some rights. Civil law basically governs that law that where individuals are hurting each other or trampling upon each other's rights. And what duty do I have as a member of society to make sure that I'm not hurting another specific person? Okay. When I do that, when I run over grandma, and I had the duty not to run over grandma and to behave and drive in a safe manner, I've committed what's called a tort. Okay. On the other side, in criminal law, the purpose is to protect society. Now, if I have purposely run down grandma and I have killed her, okay, I have committed murder. Now, criminal law, the purpose is designed to keep people like me. I am a menace to society, not just to grandma, but to everybody else. I need to be off of the streets. That is the purpose of criminal law, is to protect society from wrongdoers, from bad people. Okay? If I have committed if I have not followed this law, then I have committed what is called a crime. So in civil law, it's a tort. In criminal law, it's a crime. What's my penalty for accidentally running over grandma? Well, the worst thing that can happen to me is that I'm going to have to pay for grandma's medical bills and her pain and suffering, etc., etc. An injunction is something where the judge could say, you're not allowed to do that anymore. So, maybe I'll get some kind of an injunction where I'm not allowed to drive, or maybe there will be a protective order where I'm not allowed to be around grandma. And specific performance is something where the judge orders something specifically to be done. This is rarely done. A lot of times, like if it was in the context of real estate law, it would be, oh, you said that you were gonna, you breached this contract for the sale of a piece of land, and the court's gonna say you have to give them that piece of land now because it's special and specific. The penalty in criminal law, if I intentionally killed grandma, then I might have to pay a fine. The fine doesn't go to grandma. Where does it go? It goes to the state. Okay? Restitution is a word that they use in criminal law where I might have to pay for grandma's medical bills. That's my restitution to the victim of my crime. I may lose my liberty, my freedom. Okay, that's me going to jail. And I may even be sentenced to death if it's serious enough. Now, who are the parties in civil law and criminal law cases? And this is where you find that people really start messing up the terminology. In civil law, the person who brings a lawsuit is called a plaintiff, and the person who's defending against it is called the defendant. They are individuals, or they might be corporations, but they're plaintiff versus defendant. In criminal law, the person who is prosecuting the case works for the state. I live in West Virginia, so the prosecutors here, they represent the entire society, the whole state of West Virginia. That's why they're called the state. That's why the cases are called State versus Smith or State versus whatever. And they are the prosecutor. They are not the attorney for the victim, but they represent the society on behalf of people who were hurt and harmed by the alleged criminal, who is also called the defendant. Okay, so two very important differences in terminology. So what's the outcome? In a civil case, if I was wrong to accidentally run over grandma, I am not guilty. In fact, I am liable. I am liable for the damages. Okay? If I didn't do it, if the jury or the judge says, no, I don't think so. No, grandma, you're barking up the wrong tree. Then I'm not liable. That is the correct terminology. I'm either liable or I'm not liable. You do not use the word guilt when you are talking about a civil case. Please don't do that. Okay. In criminal law, though, that's when you do use guilty or not guilty. So if the jury or the judge finds that I purposely ran over grandma, then I am guilty. If they find that I did not do that, then I am not guilty. Okay? So that's the difference in terminology. And again, if you want to sound like an intelligent legal professional, you have to understand the difference between these terms and use them correctly and in the right context. Okay, so criminal law. there's two different kinds. There's felony and the misdemeanor. Felony is where the maximum possible punishment is death or imprisonment for 1 year or more. And the misdemeanor is where the punishment is less than that, where your maximum possible punishment is either a fine or you could be imprisoned for less than 1 year. Okay, so that's the difference between felony and misdemeanor. In civil law, instead of being called a crime, it's called a tort, and it's a wrongful act. They are based upon rules of conduct with which each member of our society is expected to conform. It's that normal thing, like you shouldn't do that. Okay, and there's three different types of torts. There's an intentional tort, there's an unintentional tort, and there's strict liability torts. Let's start off with the intentional torts. Intentional torts, you'll notice assault, battery, trespass. Doesn't that sound like a crime to you? Well, yeah, because they're also crimes. You can have a case where you're civilly pursuing somebody in court and you're also criminally pursuing them in court. Now, remember, in the criminal case, it's not victim versus perpetrator. It is the state of wherever you are or the federal government versus the defendant, because they're trying to protect society. In a civil case, it's actually the victim versus the actual defendant. There is no prosecutor involved. The state is not involved in this. It is a completely separate court system, and you can sue side by side with a criminal case. And remember, whenever you sue civilly, you are suing for damages, for money. And in the other case, you're wanting that person to go to jail or be placed on probation or something like that. You're looking for a criminal penalty in the criminal case. In the civil case, you're looking for money. There's two different standards of proof. It's not on the slide, but in a civil case, you just want to show that it's more likely than not that that person wronged you. In the criminal case, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. So they have even two different standards of proof. It's a lot easier to pursue somebody in a civil case than it is criminally. Okay, an unintentional tort makes up most of the torts. Okay, this is something that somebody did and it was an accident. This is me accidentally, I backed over grandma. Okay, I just didn't see her standing there and I ran over her. That was an accident. I didn't do that on purpose. I didn't wake up and say, oh, I'd like to kill grandma today. That's not what happened. So that's a negligence action. And, that's where somebody has a duty to do something. They breach that duty by failing to do that thing or recognize that duty, and then they caused damage to somebody. It's duty, breach, causation, damages. If you have all of those things, you have an unintentional tort. Strict liability is where if somebody gets an injury and they're doing something, then they don't have to show negligence. They don't have to show anything else. It just is. So in defective product cases, for example, if I'm using a ladder in the manner in which you were supposed to be using a ladder, okay? I'm not abusing it. I'm not doing anything else, but the ladder falls apart because it was defectively manufactured. I don't have to show any negligence or anything else. I can try to sue the ladder manufacturer and say, you issued me a defective product and I was using it the manner in which it was supposed to be used, but you didn't make it right, so I got hurt. Okay. Now, substantive versus procedural law. These are the other classifications. Remember, we had criminal and civil, and we went over those in great detail. Now we're moving on to substantive versus procedural law and what the differences are. Remember, substantive law was that meat of the case. It was the law itself. It said, thou shalt not kill grandma. So substantive law creates or defines rights or duties. That's what it does. That's the purpose of it. It tells you what you can and cannot do. And procedural law provides the mechanisms to enforce your substantive rights and duties. That's, okay, she killed grandma. Now we need to arrest her. As soon as they start to arrest me, that's procedural law kicking in. And it's enforcing that law not to kill grandma. Procedural law tells the government what process to use and how to address a situation where someone has not followed the substantive law. So, substantive law covers all kinds of things, right? You can't drive too fast on the interstate. You can't park over here because the city says you can't park there. There's some kind of city ordinance. So some examples of substantive law are murder, speeding, shoplifting, anything that would violate your individual rights and duties, such as being wrongfully terminated if you're sexually harassed at work or at school, and any kind of negligence. Now, you notice this was a mix of criminal and civil law because both criminal and civil law have what are called substantive laws. And substantive laws are divided into two other groups. You've got public substantive laws, and then you have private substantive laws. And this is really easy to remember. Public substantive laws are things that affect the general public. Okay? Crimes. Okay? Shoplifting. It doesn't say Mary shall not shoplift. It says you can't shoplift. Don't shoplift. That applies to everybody equally. So that involves the relationship of the government to society as a whole. So any kind of criminal law, constitutional law, administrative law, all of that, that's all going to be public law. Private law, where it's just between you and me. You and I have a beef, okay? You build a fence on my property, neighbor, and I don't want you to build a fence on my property. It's between you and me. This is private law between two people. Private law is going to cover things like contract law, tort law, divorce, right? You can't get any more private than divorce because it's specifically those two individuals. It has nothing to do with society as a whole. It has to do with Mr. and Mrs. Smith who are getting a divorce. Okay, so procedural law is also sometimes called adjective law, okay? And remember, procedural law is like arresting somebody and so on. Okay. Some examples of procedural law are serving a summons, initiating a lawsuit, making motions, conducting discovery and trial. Like, what processes do you go through? And remember, it's sometimes called adjective law. I know it's really weird, but some jurisdictions use that. And on the CP exam, it may refer to it as adjective law. And some examples of where you would find procedural law. Look at all these rules. They all say procedure in them. Like, for example, Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure. Now, the Federal Rules of Evidence doesn't say the word procedure in it, but evidence that is to be admitted at trial. Think about it. This is how I'm going to enforce things. This isn't the law itself, the actual substantive law, thou shalt not kill grandma, but it's what evidence can I introduce so that I can convict you of killing grandma? Is there a videotape that I need to, am I going to, the grill of the car that's got grandma's hat still stuck in it? Am I admitting that into evidence? And then the Federal Rules of Appellate Procedure. How do you go through the appeal process if you lose? So that's the different classifications of law in a nutshell. I hope this really helped you understand. As always, if you have questions, just contact me. I'd be more than happy to help you. Have a good day.